Joining us today, Mark Moss, entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience. You have built and scaled 6 companies, and since diving into crypto in 2015, you have become a prominent Bitcoin advocate, launching Block United and hosting the Mark Moss Show on iHeartRadio. Got over 700,000 YouTube subscribers on your Market Disruptors channel. You have been also recently nominated as Chief Bitcoin Strategist at TIO Alpha PLC. And you are also a co-author of the
Yes.
Uncommunist Manifesto. What initially drew you to Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to there. And boy, what a long introduction. I didn't realize I did so many things. What I would say to answer that question is what originally drew me to Bitcoin. And it was around 2015. And I think ultimately what drew me to Bitcoin was what draws everybody to Bitcoin is what we call NGU, or number go up. And so we look at it sort of as this way to make money, and then we realize it's much more than that. And I remember looking at Bitcoin around 2012, 2013. My business partner at the time said, hey, maybe we should buy some of this. And it just ran up to like $1,000. Then it crashed as I was watching it. And I was like, oh, okay. And I kind of forgot about it. In 2015, I was in the process of setting up a trust and a bank account and working on residency down in Panama. And I was trying to get money out of the U.S. banking system, because I still felt uneasy about the banking system after the 2008 collapse. And I was working on this Panama thing, like I said, not only to get dollars out of the U.S., but also residency as well. And Bitcoin sort of came across my plate again. I looked at it again, and I thought, wait a minute, this is sort of the same thing. This is getting money out of the banking system. Okay, I'm in. So it was like solving that problem. It caught my eye from the NGU, but then it was more about getting money out of the banking system. However, like I said, then it changes you. So then all of a sudden I have it, and you put money into it, and you start going, well, what is this thing? Let me learn more about it. And I very quickly realized that it's not just a tool to make money. It's a tool to change the entire system. And I quickly realized that we finally have a tool that we can win. The libertarians, they just want to yell and scream and yell and try to change things through political leadership. But the tool is the money. And once I realized that, I figured I got to go tell everybody I know about this. And so I did. And basically I haven't shut up since, right? We just keep talking. And so we're trying to change the world. So that's what initially led me to it. And so what I would say overall, if Bitcoin is anything, it's freedom technology, if it's anything. And I would say that's also true today, and we're seeing it evolve. And so the biggest theme in the Bitcoin space right now is Bitcoin. Some people are calling the suit coiners. So now we have the suits, we have the Wall Street, we have the institutions, and we even have the sovereigns coming into the Bitcoin space. And there's a big thing, hottest thing, like I said, probably in this space right now, is all these Bitcoin corporations, like what Michael Saylor pioneered with Strategy. Now we have all these, a bunch of companies doing similar things where they're starting a public vehicle and launching Bitcoin through there. And a lot of hardcore Bitcoiners, the OG Bitcoiners as we call them, they're not happy about this. Bitcoin's not for the suits, it's not for the institutions, it's not for the corporations. And I think that's wrong, because Bitcoin, if nothing else, is freedom technology. And when you understand the greater financial system, which eventually, over the long lens of time, Bitcoin will change. But when you realize in the financial system today, there's over $300 trillion that is stuck in some form of debt instrument, in some sort of fixed income instrument. And so most people passively invest their money. Most people don't think about it. Their paycheck goes in, and their pensions or whatever it is. And those are underperforming because they're stuck in the fiat debt denominated world. And all of those people are losing their purchasing power. They don't realize that inflation is stealing that from them. And they can't just go buy Bitcoin. Obviously, that's the best answer. But these Bitcoin Treasury companies are giving these people a life raft. They're giving them a chance to get out of that. And so, yes, while I've seen the space change over time, and it's evolved from the cypherpunks who were just hardcore coders trying to preserve freedom, to me trying to get my money out of the banking system, to now today being corporate institutional, it's all the same thing. And it's all about bringing freedom back.
A great answer. This is exactly what I was going to ask you for, because in your last interview with Jeff Booth, you were emphasizing this. This is the first global free market instrument, which is completely changing the world how we're seeing today. It is completely decentralizing everything that we have seen until now. What do you think will be like the next steps? You also described lately that Bitcoin is like the first new financial asset in 500 years that is enabling strategies like previously reserved only for 1% of the most wealthy population. How does its mathematical certainty, of course, scarcity, make it a game changer for the wealth building compared to traditional assets?
Bitcoin is the first new financial asset in 500 years. And I want to explain what that means, but let's just go back a little bit more. So, what happens is we get new technologies, and it's always technology that changes the world. And it changes the world because it changes the way that we work and we interact and we communicate and all these different things. And what happens is whenever we get something new, we try to understand what it is by comparing it to something else that we already know. Now, we are in the sixth technological revolution that we've had. So in 1778, we had the Industrial Revolution. That was the invention of mechanized machines. About 50 years later, we had steam engines and railways. About 50 years later, we had electricity and steel. About 50 years later, we had oil fuels, automobiles, mass production. About 50 years later, we had the microprocessor, which brought personal computers, telecom, internet. And now we're witnessing a new technological revolution. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because each one gives us a new set of building blocks. So when we had electricity and steel, we could do things that we couldn't have done before. And we couldn't at the time imagine what we would do with electricity and steel because we didn't have those building blocks to build it. So we try to understand, what is this electricity? What is this? Well, it's like the first app, the first killer app was a light bulb. Oh, it's sort of like a digital candle. Okay, it was like that, but obviously it was so much more. And I say that because Bitcoin is something similar where what is it? Well, it's sort of like digital gold, and it's sort of like a way we can store energy, and it's sort of like a way that we can preserve our wealth, and it is like all those things, but it's also so much more that we don't even know. And so now with this new tool, we're able to build new things that we had never imagined before. So in the early days of the internet, like in the mid 90s, for example, people thought one day we're going to have these online message boards. One day we'll be able to buy things online. But they were imagining what we're already doing on the internet. What they didn't imagine was our cars would be hooked to something called a cloud, navigating us around traffic using social media, because we didn't have a cloud and we didn't have social media, right? So now we have this new asset. We have this Bitcoin, this new piece of technology. And it's sort of like a financial asset. It's sort of like a way to communicate. It's sort of like a new, it's sort of like a decentralized network that is the most secure network in the history of the world. What can we do with a secure network, right? So we're starting to ask these questions, but it's also given us the new financial asset in 500 years. So we've had real estate, which has been there forever. And then we had commodities. So that's the wheat and the gold and the oil. And then about 500 years ago, we introduced the equity or stocks. Now, there's options on stocks and derivatives, but basically that's the only new one that we've had. And now we have Bitcoin. And so now we're able to build new types of things with it. So, for example, right now we're seeing the rebuilding of the entire global financial system based off of that asset.
Yeah. Yeah, that's completely correct. You also been calling the death of the any other digital assets like altcoins. You said in 2022 that there is like the Ethereum and XRP are basically in their graveyard. Yes, you used that word. Why do you believe Bitcoin is like better than any other altcoins? How would you explain that? There is a lot of confusion here in Spain. You know, I'm trying to explain to people that there is only one Bitcoin and the rest is completely different thing. We've got commodity versus security. How would you explain that to someone that is like completely new in the ecosystem, that Bitcoin and the rest is completely different thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the honest answer is that it's a little bit complex. And so a lot of times I've had people ask me, explain Bitcoin to me like I'm 5 years old in 5 minutes. And I'm like, you know, like you can't get it in 5 minutes. Like, I'm sorry, right? So it's like I'm going to give you an easy answer, but the better answer is that over time, the more hours you spend, the more you'll start to understand this. And so the answers are there. You just have to go find them. But to understand really why Bitcoin is different than all the other altcoins or cryptocurrencies, you have to get a little bit to the technical side of things. You might also have to understand a little bit of philosophy. So typically, I say typically, solutions come to problems. We have a problem. How can we solve the problem? And we come up with a new solution. But in the fiat system that we have today, we have so much money sloshing around. A lot of times we have money chasing problems that don't need to be solved. But typically we have a problem and a solution. So for example, some of the big problems in the world today are unlimited money printing, right? All the governments of the world continue to inflate the monetary supply, which steals our purchasing power and makes us poorer, right? That's a big problem. Number two, governments print all this money, which gives them more power. And then they use that power to have more authority over us. Now, in some countries like North Korea or Afghanistan, maybe in Afghanistan, women can't even have a bank account, right? The Taliban will take that. There's also about 2 billion people in the world today who have no access to banking because they don't have permission to join. So we have this rise of authoritarianism and this permission system. Those, in my opinion, are problems. And I would love to have a solution. So what would be the solution to that? Well, the solution to a controlled currency that they continue to print unlimited amounts of, the solution would be to have something that nobody could control. And instead of unlimited amounts, it has a fixed supply. Okay. Well, there's also a problem with this authority and this permission system. So it might make sense the solution would be a permissionless system that anybody could join. Right. So when you start to understand, well, what does the market need? So what happened is Bitcoin was introduced as that. The first, you mentioned commodity, so the definition of a commodity would be, in this instance, would be something that has no common issuer. There's not a company that produced it. It's just anyone can go get it. Number two, anyone can get it, and no matter where they get it in the world, it's fungible. So if I dig for gold in Africa or dig for gold in Mexico or the US, anyone can dig a hole and find gold. And gold is fungible. Gold is gold. Oil is oil. If I grow an orange or wheat, it's the same. And Bitcoin's the same. Anyone can get a computer, plug it in, and get the Bitcoin, and it's fungible. All the other ones have been created as a company that created those cryptocurrencies. But more importantly, what that means is that means a company created it and controls it. So with Ethereum, for example, the Ethereum bros, Joseph Lubin, Vitalik Buterin, and the people that hold the most Ethereum tokens and have the consensus, they've changed the monetary issuance and supply like 3 times in the last couple of years. Sort of like what the Federal Reserve does, sort of like what the central banks, the BIS and the IMF do. And so that doesn't solve the problem. So that's the first thing to understand, is that what we wanted is a decentralized system that nobody can control. What we wanted was a decentralized system that is permissionless to join, a decentralized system that allows us to have this fixed supply, this finite amount. And Bitcoin solves that. Again, all the other ones are controlled by some extent. Now, they're going to spin it, and it's what we call like an affinity scam. They try to say they're like Bitcoin so people buy them, and they confuse everybody because it is a little bit technical to understand this. But again, we can just see how they've been able to change this. But we can see that at the end of the day, in my opinion, there's decentralized, nobody owns it or controls it, and there's not. They want to tell you there's like a decentralized-ish. It's like a spectrum, but I believe it's hard. It's either it is or isn't. And that I'd say is the big difference. I'd say one more big difference I think is important to understand is that in order to be decentralized, everybody has to be able to participate. And so what does decentralized even mean? Instead of Facebook or Google or whatever having a database, a server that runs the code, a database, instead of one, a decentralized database like Bitcoin means that there's millions of databases. And in order for it to be decentralized, everyone should be able to run a database. So the Bitcoin blockchain, the Bitcoin database is, I'm not sure how big it is today, but it's small enough where like a kid in Africa with, say, a 5-year-old laptop could run it. Yeah. Okay. But you can't run a full node with Ethereum or whichever one that you want. It needs to be on a professional server in a co-location facility. And so that also prevents it from being truly decentralized. It's a little bit more technical. We can get into it more, but that's what I'd say would be the high level.
Yeah. You mentioned at the beginning that now we are entering to the new trend of the adoption. A very hot topic lately is everything that is going on around Bitcoin Treasury companies. We've got Strategy, we've got MetaPlanet, we've got the Blockchain Group here in Europe as the first one, following the famous playbook of Michael Saylor. They've got incredible gains. They already overpassed the gains of the Bitcoin itself. What do you think make this Bitcoin Treasury strategy company so powerful? How do you differ from the traditional like crypto or any other crypto project?
Yeah. Well, what I'd say first answer the question as to why they're so powerful. They're powerful because at the end of the day, what investing is, I mean, you could basically call it arbitrage. I mean, markets are discounting mechanisms. So basically, I'm trying to buy something cheaper today than I believe it'll be worth in the future. That's what markets are. And then we have arbitrage between the markets where I could buy something cheaper in one market and sell it for more in another market. And so what we're seeing is that in the traditional finance space, in TradFi, we're in a debt-based monetary system. So that means that money is created through debt issuance. And then we have a traditional financial system that's been built around that. Again, I already mentioned there's about over $300 trillion in the global debt markets, the bond markets. We have another $180 trillion in the stock, in the equity markets. And in those markets, they're inefficient. And Bitcoin, being the best performing asset in the world over 15 years, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, 1 year, choose your time frame. And again, it being a new building block, it gives us opportunities to do new things. So we have an asset that's going up by 50 or 60% a year. But traditional equity markets go up by 10% a year. And we can borrow debt at 3% or 5%. So if I could borrow at 5%, if I can borrow at 10% and buy an asset that goes up by 50 or 60%, I have a big margin. I have an arbitrage. And because we're in a debt-based system, we have all this debt and equity in this TradFi system that allows us to now bring it over into the Bitcoin space. So it creates this enormous opportunity. Bitcoin itself, as I already mentioned, is already the best performing opportunity. But now these companies can apply leverage by leveraging the public debt and equity markets to lever up the Bitcoin and grow even faster. It's something that Pierre Richard wrote a paper on, I think in 2014, called a speculative attack. And it's no different than what happened in the Weimar Republic of Germany. A man named Hugo Steenes did this to become the richest man in Germany. So this is not new to Bitcoin, but basically what it is when I can borrow in a cheaper currency and buy a stronger one. So to understand this outside of Bitcoin, in Turkey, the Turkish lira over the last 5 years has fallen about 90% to the US dollar. So if I was in Turkey 5 years ago, knowing that the currency was going to crash to the dollar, what I would have wanted to do is get out of the Turkish lira and go into the US dollar, right? A better way to do it I would have borrowed as much money as I could in the Turkish lira, bought as much real estate and capital assets, borrowing as much money, and then that inflation of the Turkish lira basically pays it off. It makes the value of that worth less. That would be a better play. And so that's exactly what we're doing. We're borrowing money in the traditional markets, in the US dollar markets, that's being inflated away, and buying a stronger asset like Bitcoin. And so that's the speculative attack. And then by doing that, it accelerates the process. Yeah. So by buying more Bitcoin, it makes Bitcoin go up in value more. And they have to print more money, which makes it less valuable. And we continue to have this rise.
Yeah. And we are having this wonderful rise today and yesterday. Yeah. We are at
and Bitcoin is taking off. And so how big of an opportunity is this? So right now, as I said already, there's $300 trillion stuck in debt markets, public debt equity markets. And that money is trapped under certain mandates. Now, it's in risky investments, so they're typically buying these collateralized debt obligations. So it's like There's a movie called The Big Short, and they talk about what happened in the great financial crash with the housing crash, and it kind of explains it. But you basically take a bunch of debt and put it all together in an instrument. So you don't really know what's in there. So there's no visibility to know what's in the basket, and I don't know what my risk level is, number one. Number two, there's not enough collateral there to even back the debt that I have. Number three, it's paying me 3 to 5%. 3 to 5% return on my money, which is not keeping up with the rate of global debasement. Now, for example, what Michael Saylor has done with strategy and what we're going to do with Satsuma is we'll create individual specific products that match up with each one of these pools of capital. And so with Saylor and he's created Strike, STRK, Strife, STRF, right? Each one of these is a specific product. And instead of giving you a mixed up, jumbled basket that you can't quantify the risk, paying 3 to 5%, he's giving, and under collateralized, he's giving you a pristine asset like Bitcoin, over collateralized, like 6 to 1, and it pays you 10% and 3%, or no risk or low risk and 10%. Obviously, the answer is simple. And so you can start to see how that demand, that $300 trillion, starts coming over.
All right. So do you plan if we could like jump now to Tao, to Satsuna, which is like your new project you will be starting very, very soon. Do you plan to diversify your portfolio of the instruments that you're going to offer just as strategy is doing with, as you mentioned, Strife and Strike? Or are you starting with just the one pack of the instruments? And if you could give us a little bit more of the information, if you can, about the company, because as far as I understand, it's going to be the first one that is the artificial intelligence oriented and Bitcoin oriented.
Yeah. So I would say there's really, maybe I'd say there's 3 different types of Bitcoin treasury companies. So the first type would be like Tesla. You make automobiles, maybe we do robots, and you have money in your savings account, your treasury, and we put some of that into Bitcoin. Okay, but that's not really a Bitcoin treasury company, so we'll slide those out. The next level is like I have a business like Semler Scientific, and I also am running a treasury company. So I'm still trying to get more Bitcoin in my treasury by using the public debt and equity markets, but I also run a business. And then the third level is what we call like a pure play Bitcoin treasury company. So this is like MicroStrategy or MetaPlanet. And all they are is creating financial products. That's what their product to the market is their financial products. So yes, MicroStrategy still has a software business called, they still sell the software, but it's become such a small part of their business that, it's really inconsequential at this point. They don't even really talk about it much. So what they've done, again, is they've created these products for the U.S. investors. MetaPlanet was able to successfully copy that for Japanese investors. So you have to understand, I talk about these pools of capital, but they're all in these different jurisdictions. So there's U.S. financial markets, Japanese financial markets, there's UK financial markets, there's Chinese markets, right? So there's all these different markets. And so what Japan did is successfully duplicated what Strategy did, but they did it in Japan. And what this company, Satsuma, is going to do is do the same thing, but in the UK market. And the reason why is because each of these markets are different. They have their own pool of capital and they have their own regulations and mandates. And so it's like, do what Strategy did, do what MetaPlanet did as a pure play company, but then do it in the UK. In the UK specifically, it's one of the largest financial hubs of the world. And in the UK specifically, it has the highest ratio of fixed income, these debt type of pools of capital, to the overall markets. So that means there's a large amount of people who are stuck in these losing money opportunities that need to be rescued into a Bitcoin company. So that's sort of what the plan is. As far as you asked, sort of like the AI piece, that is sort of the old existing business, sort of like Strategy software business. And so that business is there, but the goal is to build out the financial products based off of Bitcoin.
Talking about the strategy and all this adoption with the Bitcoin strategy companies, as you mentioned, there has been lately revealed like graphic from Bloomberg, I guess, when it was showing the success of the ETFs of Bitcoin in comparison to any other ETF. There was like the inflow of 85 billion just in 1 year. Any other ETF needed to wait like 3, 4, or 5, or 10 years. How do you think this adoption will impact the future price of Bitcoin? Not going too far, like 2030.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So, number one, the ETFs are new and there's a massive amount of inflow, as you're saying. And the reason why is because, again, we have these traditional financial markets. We have all this money that's in there and they have these mandates. They can only invest into certain things. So, a lot of people who have retirement savings in these accounts, they can't buy Bitcoin. Now, they should sell everything, go buy the Bitcoin, but they can't. Their money is stuck there. They can only buy stocks or equities, for example. So they can't go buy regular Bitcoin and put it in cold storage, but they can buy Bitcoin through an ETF. And so the big number that you're stating is because we're recognizing all these giant pools of capital in traditional finance that want to get to Bitcoin, but they can't. And now that there's a pathway, there's a straw to get there, it's starting to come over very rapidly. So that's why it's happening so fast. Now, what will that do to the price? Well, there's a couple of things that I would think through. So number one, at the end of the day, price moves on supply and demand. Now, stocks are a little bit different. Stocks are evaluated based off of the company and their potential to grow their profits and distribute those profits and cash flows into the future. But commodities, it's basically just supply and demand. Oil. Will there be more demand for oil or less? Will we have more oil supply or less? Oranges, wheat, whatever. Bitcoin is the most understanding supply and demand metrics of oil is not easy. What's going to happen with war in the Middle East? Will electric vehicles take over? Right. So it's not that easy, easier than stocks. But then we have Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a fixed supply. So the only thing we have to understand is what's the demand. Now, we know that all this money, both in the public debt and equity markets that's trapped, is now starting to find its way in. So that's a lot of demand. Right. So what will that do to the price? Well, if the supply stays fixed and the demand goes up, that should push the price up greatly. The question after that you asked, which is then where does that put the price? Now, I have a whole talk I gave in I gave the closing keynote at Bitcoin MENA in December in Abu Dhabi, the capital of capital. And I projected out with math, breaking down where I think Bitcoin will be in 2030, 2040, and 2050. And I showed the math as to why I have that. But basically what happens is, if you think about it like this, when the central banks print more money, it pushes asset prices up, right? So they're increasing the amount of water and the boats rise. But not all of them go up at the same rate. So what I did for this exercise, for this talk, is I looked at how much money the world governments have created, how much inflation to the monetary system that we've had, and what that's done to asset prices. And then we look at that ratio and then we project out in the future because the US government projects that. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they tell us what that will be for the next 30 years. Now, I believe it's way understated. I believe it'll be more than what they state. But using what they've given us and extrapolating that forward for the next 30 years and what that will do to asset prices overall and where I think Bitcoin fits in, I think Bitcoin's at $1 million by 2030. It's at 14 million by 2040. And it's about 44 million by 2050.
All right.
And I think that's conservative.
You mentioned the retirement plans. We in Spain,
Yes.
we are having like the debate ultimately. We know that our financial system is broken. It's not something that is going on in Turkey or in the United States. It's happening all over the world. In Spain, even more, I may say. We are even being now warned that we will not be able to retire with 63, 65 like now. We will have to wait until 71, 73. Well, me personally, I think I will never see any retirement. I don't even count on it, you know. I understand how the system works. It's just impossible that within 30 years we're going to have any retirement plans. I know that the very similar problem you are having in United States. You mentioned once that the traditional retirement system, as it was designed in 1930, is failing. All the baby boomers now are having almost no savings. So what specific solution you would propose or you would suggest for anyone, especially to the young ones, how they should start knowing that it's not going to anywhere? You know, the money will be printed endlessly. There was some attempt to fix it, but we know how it ended up. Elon Musk got burned out very quickly. Even he couldn't do anything. So what would you suggest? What would you advise to young, middle-aged, and other people for their retirement?
Yeah. Well, what I would say is that number one, you mentioned like in Spain, them changing the age of retirement. So when I think about that, the government's going to tell me when I can retire. No, no, no. I'll decide when I retire. So
That's
basically,
very
what that
good.
means is I'm dependent on the government. The government's going to save me, or they're not going to save me. The government will tell me when I. No, 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 no. I'll decide when I retire, and I'll decide that because I build the life that I want. I decide what I want. I decide what it's going to take to get there. I make a plan and I achieve that plan. How do you achieve that plan? Well, you achieve that plan by realizing, to the point that you've made, that the governments are not going to stop printing money and they will continually debase the money. So if I'm saving in dollars or if I'm only earning dollars, I'm going to be losing. My quality of life will continue to decline. Most people already know this. This isn't groundbreaking. So they realize they have to be saving. So they're saving in the traditional financial markets, as we've been talking about. Their paychecks, their money is going into, stock indexes and debt markets and income markets and things like that. The problem is none of those are really keeping up with the rate of this monetary expansion either. Most people don't understand this because they use their fiat currency, the dollar, or maybe in your case, the euro, as their unit of account. So, for example, today I posted on my Instagram that the S&P 500 has made a new all-time high, but that's in US dollars. Priced in Bitcoin, it's down 15%. So, what is the unit of account? If you're only measuring in the manipulated fiat currency, you see the wrong number. So, I think that's another key to understanding this. So, most people already know that the money's going to buy me less in the future, so I have to invest it. But what they don't realize is their investments don't get them anywhere. The next thing that they don't realize is that the whole idea of saving up money and then living off of the savings is sort of broken because number one, it's not going to be enough. Number two, then what? You're just hoping that you die before your money runs out, which is pretty terrible. What they don't realize is that the way the 1% build wealth is to take their money and buy assets and then never sell the assets. Now, sort of what we talked about through the Bitcoin Treasury play, how they're using this speculative attack, how they're using public debt and equity markets against a performing asset, we can do the same in our own life. I have a video that I've titled The 5-Year Retirement Plan. It basically involves Bitcoin. And I have a book. You can get it for free on my website. It's onemarkmoss.com. A book on how to retire tax-free off of Bitcoin. And so basically now we have an asset that's going up by 55, 60% per year. That's what it's been averaging for the last couple of years. If the asset's going up by 50%, but I can borrow against it at 10%, then I could do that in perpetuity. So what does that mean? Most people don't really understand that. So most people would think, because they think in traditional financial terms, I have to buy an asset that gives me cash flow. So I need to buy a rental property. I have to buy a stock that pays a dividend. Or I buy Bitcoin, but I have to loan it out. I have to earn yield on the Bitcoin. It has to be a productive asset. But they misunderstand what cash flow is. If I buy a rental property and it makes me $1,000 a month, that's cash flow. But what if I buy the property for $100,000 and then I sell it a year later for $200,000? Was that also cash flow? Right. So we start to think about it a little bit differently, and that's why I use that. With Bitcoin, we can harvest the appreciation as cash flow. So if Bitcoin's going from 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, along the way, I can take some of that appreciation, some of that gain off, but I don't do it by selling it. I do it by using debt against it. So if I wanted $100,000 a year of tax-free income for the rest of my life, in traditional financial markets, they're going to tell you to save up $3-4 million. But if I had 100,000 today, I could probably achieve that. I would buy one Bitcoin today. If that's worth $1 million in 2030, I can borrow 10% of that against it. And when I borrow it, it's debt. That's not taxable. You pay tax on gains, on income. You don't pay tax on debt. So I have $100,000. I get to spend that. I don't pay tax. The next year, Bitcoin went up from there, and I borrow a little bit more against it. And the next year, I borrow a little bit more. The reason why I want to do that is two main reasons. Number one, so I don't pay tax. If I sold it, I'd have to pay a big chunk of that to tax. Number two, if I sell it, I no longer have the asset going up at 30, 40, 50%. So I borrow against it. I don't pay the tax penalty. Number two, it's still going up faster than the rate. And a lot of people then say, okay, that sounds great, but when do you pay off the debt? And the question is, why would you ever want to pay off the debt? As long as the asset continues to grow faster than the debt is accumulating, then you'd want to do that. How long will that last? Maybe in perpetuity. That's the way the system works. Right now, you would, well, at least in the United States, I would borrow money to buy an apartment complex for the cash flow. So this is how the system works. Most people just haven't understood it. And most people could achieve that retirement number they want within about 5 years if they get into Bitcoin today.
Yeah, no, that's the same thing happening in Spain. People are educated that the only way to invest in the assets is to buy a house, to buy a property, then to rent it. With everything that it involves here, with the laws that we have, that the private property is totally unprotected by the government, by the laws. Everyone can occupy your house, and there is no way you can throw out the occupants from your house. It's completely different than in the United States. So it's even not rational anymore to buy a house, because if you're not living there, you risk that someone will just enter, and it will take you like 5-7 years to throw them out. So that's terrible.
That's even worse than California.
Terrible. It's terrible. The other question there
And
is,
and let's talk about that for a second, though. Let's talk about that for a second, because as I said, and I think what you're agreeing to, most people realize this, meaning that I can't really save in dollars. I have to buy assets. Most people realize this. So what do I buy? So I can buy real estate and I can rent it out, but then I have all the problems with that, because like, what happens if somebody moves in there and I can't get them out for years? What happens with the maintenance? What happens if someone slips and falls and sues me? So there's all the issues with that. So right now, the real estate market globally is about $350 trillion. What percentage of those people own this real estate as rental properties, hotels, apartments, whatever, go, you know what? It's not worth the risk or the hassle or the 5% return, or it's not worth the risk and the hassle for 5% return. I could just sell it and buy Bitcoin and make a 50% return. And I have no hassle, no headache, no legal complications, none of that. And so how much of that 350 trillion will start to come over into Bitcoin as well? We didn't even talk about that number. And obviously a big chunk. I mean, I started my career in real estate. I've pretty much gotten rid of all my rentals and moved it into Bitcoin. And I see it across the internet all the time. Everyone's like, I'm out. We're done with the properties. We're buying Bitcoin. And so there's a big chunk there as well.
Yeah. But I think, there's still a lack of education here. That's why I started this podcast. That's why I'm trying to bring it to Spain. People are afraid of Bitcoin, and aren't you afraid that someone will just take your property and it will never be able, or at least 5-7 years, will never be able to get it back? So people just don't understand. I think there is still a lot of work, so that they change the chip, there is this mind shift done before it happens. But of course, it is a future, as you say. You are also released very lately the great video regarding the 50-year cycle framework. I would really like you to explain it very briefly here to our audience. You outlined that there are like 4 phases in the cycles, and that we are now in the frenzy phase. Can you please give us a little bit more of the details around it? I think it was very, very interesting.
Yeah, so I kind of talked about this earlier, but sort of to recap it again and give a little bit more detail around it. About every 50 years, the world changes through technology. It's something what I call the quantum wave, because the world takes this quantum leap forward. And not only does it take a quantum leap forward because of the technology, but also the financial markets change. So we're on the 6th one. It happens about every 50 years for the last 300 years. So about 300 years ago, the whole world was basically just dirt. All right. We had the farm, the cottage industry, but today we have technology. We had electricity and steel and heavy equipment. We had oil fuels, we had automobiles, we had mass production, and then we had the microprocessors. And today we're on our 6th one, which I call the decentralized revolution. So it's happened 6 times. Now, the thing with cycles is that the more time a pattern repeats, the more likely it is to repeat. So, for example, the Bitcoin halving cycle about every 4 years. Are we going to have another one? Most likely. we had them every cycle, right? And so now we're on the sixth one. So we understand it's coming again. Now we also understand, because it's happened 6 times, that each one has sort of this repeatable framework, this cycle. And so there's 4 distinct phases. And it's because there's really 2 types of humans. But we have these 4 distinct phases. So the first phase is what we call the eruption phase. This is where the invention happens. And there's the obviously inventors believe it. And then there's other people that also believe that as well, this new technology. And so they quickly rush in. This is like this retail adoption. But also it's like, in Bitcoin's case, is Bitcoin going to be the winner? Well, let's go try, I think there's 16 million altcoins today. Let's go try 16 other variations. That's phase 1. And that led to the altcoin explosion. That led to NFTs. That led to all of that. But what happens is, as we go to phase 2, we're past sort of this retail phase. Now the big money starts coming in. This is where the institutions come in. This is called the frenzy phase. And now we have institutions bringing big money, real money into the markets. But the problem that they have is that they can't invest into those small little companies. They want real companies, ones that have enough liquidity to absorb $1 billion, ones that are registered with regulators, right? Real companies. And so that's sort of where we're at right now. That's the second phase. That's also the biggest part of the growth phase. So if you look at technology, not only do we have these 4 phases, but we also use something called an S-curve to measure how fast a technology has adoption. And the way an S-curve works is that the time it takes to go from 0 to 10% is the time it takes to go from 10 to 90%. So it's like this S. And so in this second phase is where we hit that S-curve, the parabolic part. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So for a lot of people who are just hearing about Bitcoin now, good news. It's not too late. As a matter of fact, most of the growth is still in front of us in through this next phase, probably over the next 5 years. It also means that maybe we don't have those big drawdowns that we were having before if we start to go into this parabolic phase. Now, will there be another drawdown? Of course there will. We just don't know how deep. So that's sort of the second phase. The third phase is where we get more into the synergy. This is where it starts becoming mainstream for everybody. This is where Bitcoin sort of moves into its medium of exchange phase. This is where we start using Bitcoin on a more regular basis. It has that synergy. It's really starting to take effect. And then the fourth final phase is just sort of where it's just mainstream. It's sort of like when I started investing in the .com phase into internet companies, my roommate at the time, we were crazy people talking about these crazy internet companies, but today there's no such thing as internet companies. They're just companies. And so it's where it's now just common, right? So it's not like this new thing. It's not cryptocurrency anymore. It's just money, right? Or whatever. So that would be the 4 distinct phases. And like I said, we're firmly in this phase 2. We can see this. It's like I said, by the institutions, by the sovereigns coming in. We're hitting that parabolic growth curve right now. And it's extremely powerful if you understand what those phases are, because it also helps us, number one, sort of dictate what our investment process and philosophy should be during that time. But also what's working. This is why the Bitcoin Treasury companies are the play right now, when in phase 1, it was more of like this altcoin play.
I'm having the last question, and I think it's like very relevant to Spanish audience, to what is going on here in Spain for many years. You know, in Spain, we are having more than 25% of young people unemployed in comparison to 9 in United States. So it's like almost triple. And what is worrying me even more is that more than a half of them, when they are planning their future career, they are not planning it in the private sector. They prefer to look it in the public sector because they find it more stable. They have it guaranteed until the end of their days. So the entrepreneurship spirit is like non-existent. And you, as the advocate for the entrepreneurship, you share a lot of advices for the entrepreneurs, how to navigate this unpredictable environment, sometimes very chaotic. Yesterday, you published like 22 rules of how to achieve the success. I will just mention a few of them. I just love them. The first one, find people who have achieved the success you want. Success is a horrible teacher. We learn it from our failures. You need to have clear goals before you can work towards it. what we say comes to reality. Lie about your future in a positive way. I love the last one. And I'm just like, imagine my future and I just go to it. Can you please give us some advices, like some basic points to encourage young people here in Spain to start the entrepreneurship journey according to experience, whether you need to be like natural born entrepreneur, or is it something that you can learn, or you should look for the mentor? What should you do to change this ship from the public sector to more creative entrepreneurship that can really bring better future? And as you said, decide when you retire, or you don't retire never, because when you like what you do, you don't even retire.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the debt-based monetary system has tricked us all into a lot of different ways. And one of the ways is back into this whole point of retirement, right? Where we're taught that we should go to school, get good grades, get a good job. We should save for retirement. And one day we'll have enough money where we can quit. We can do nothing all day and just live off of our savings. And so that seems to be the goal for most people. And as you said, in Spain, a lot of people want to just go into the public sector so they can be taken care of and know that there's money for them so they can retire one day. But if that's the goal, then you would ask yourself the question, why do all billionaires still work? It's obviously not a money thing. Warren Buffett just stepped down as the CEO. He's still the chairman at 93 years old. Because what we've been sold is a lie. The goal is not to work our whole life, save for retirement, and then do nothing. Like we're gonna lay on a beach chair and have someone bring us Mai Tais all day. So that's not the goal. The goal is to solve problems for the world, bring value to the world. And so what I would say, back to the question you asked, is can anybody do this? Yes and no. Anybody with the ability to have an open mind that they can change. So that it's yes, but most people, unfortunately, are ignorant and their mind is frozen. And I see this all the time. I look at all my social media contents and it's terrible. I see this. I'm like, these people are just never going to make it. They have such rigid thinking. And so if you can have an open mind, then yes, you can do it. What I would say is kind of going back to that last statement that you said, right? Whenever you talk about the future, lie. And the reason, what that means is that anytime we talk about the future, it's a lie, because tomorrow is not guaranteed. If I say that I'm going to meet you for lunch tomorrow, what if I don't make it to tomorrow, right? So we're sort of lying, right? We're talking about a future that we don't know. It's uncertain. And so why wouldn't I just talk about that positively? Oh, it's going to be terrible. What am I going to do? Or it's going to be amazing, right? We don't know either way. So why not talk about it in a positive light? And the reason why it's important to talk about it in that positive light is because what I've found to be the number one differentiator between having success or not is not how smart you are. It's not what type of family you were born in. It's not your education. It's none of those things. It really comes down to your ability, or I should say your willingness to take risk. If you're willing to shoot your shot, but you're not willing to shoot your shot if you think you're going to fail. You have to be positive to think that you have the chance of success to even try it. Otherwise, why bother? And so I have to believe in a positive future. I have to then shoot my shot, and then I have to go build the world that I want. Now, some might say, I'd rather live on my feet than die on my knees, so to speak. A coward lives, or a hero. A coward dies 1,000 times or whatever, right? So there's like all these sayings that sort of tell us these things, but it's like, you could say the risk of not trying is worse than trying. And so it depends on your mindset. But yes, I think anybody can learn these skills. They're very basic skills, but if you have an open mind.
Yeah. Great answer. Thank you so much, Mark. It was a great discussion. If you could tell us where we can find you, for sure on YouTube, in your show, where else we can look for you to follow on your great advices, to learn from you, from your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hard to find. Where I put most of the content out is YouTube, so just search Mark Moss on YouTube, and I do a ton of stuff there. I'm on all the social media platforms, different content on different platforms, but YouTube is the main platform. If you want to know more about how to retire tax-free off of Bitcoin, I have a free book. You can get it on my website, onemarkmoss.com. And then follow me along on social media to see what we're doing with Satsuma, ticker Sats in the UK. I think it's going to be really big. I'm excited about that.
That's great. Hope to see you next year in Madrid on this great event that I'm preparing. Hope you're going to be there. I will going to send you more details soon. Thank you so
Yes.
much. Hope to stay in touch and hope this is not like the last one. This is the first one, but not the last conversation that we have. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. Thank you.